what instead might I consider?
Well, what most people have now turned to is cremation. And listen, I owned funeral homes for many years in Los Angeles before I moved, and I offered cremation. That was mainly what we did because that's what people do in most urban environments, and it's by far the least expensive option for your dead body. So if money is a concern for you, that's definitely probably what you're going to choose if it's also in line with your values. But cremation is no perfect solution, I would say. There's a lot of carbon emission from cremation. There's mercury that's released and particulates that are released into the atmosphere. It uses a lot of natural gas. One cremation is about the equivalent of a 500-mile car trip. And there's also, I would say, experientially, there's somewhat of an intensity to cremation. And I think even cultures that traditionally choose cremation would agree that there is an intensity to Western cremation and the idea of these cremation machines. Because if you look at places like India or Buddhist cultures that have open-air cremation pyres, and there's a loveliness, although all that wood is an issue as well, but there's a loveliness to putting the body on an open-air pyre. In India, there's a moment where the skull cracks open, and that's the point where the soul is released. But when it came to the United States, when it came to Europe, we built these big industrial cremation machines, which are essentially large ovens. And modern crematories now, especially ones that do thousands of cremations a year, are essentially warehouses with big industrialized machines in them. And that's why it can be so inexpensive. And if cost is the most important to you, cremation is still a very, very good option. But I think that there are a lot of people who are saying, is there a way that we can improve this, make it more environmentally friendly, make it a little more gentle somehow than what we have now with cremation? And there's a couple of options. I'm going to say there's sort of three options that very much depend on things like your price point and location. So the simplest option, if you live in a more rural area or suburban area that has one of these, would be just a natural burial, a green burial, which is just a hole in the ground and we put your body in it. You know, ideally, if it's possible with the soil, we hand dig a grave, you put a cotton shroud around you, and in the hole you go. And I like that option. That actually, I think, if I died right now, that would probably actually be what I'd do. Would just be
it seems like this is good enough for billions of humans for many millennia, just for
tens of thousands of years of human history. Hole in the ground, body goes in. Absolutely, the classic.
And what happens? And what happens to you in that situation? Your body decomposes also.
Yes, and if you have, so for example, when I had my funeral home, our best option natural burial ground was out in Joshua Tree. And that soil it's beautiful out there. There's, you get to be buried literally next to a Joshua Tree, how lovely. And, there's a spiritual essence to the desert, which can be quite lovely. But as I died right now, that would probably actually be what I do, would just be
it seems like this is good enough for billions of humans for many millennia, just
for tens of thousands of years of human history. Hole in the ground, body goes in. Absolutely, the classic.
And what happens? And what happens to you in that situation? Your body decomposes also.
Yes, and if you have, so for example, when I had my funeral home, our best option natural burial ground was out in Joshua Tree. And that soil it's beautiful out there. There's
of humans for many millennia, just for
tens of thousands of years of human history. Hole in the ground, body goes in. Absolutely, the classic.
And what happens? And what happens to you in that situation? Your body decomposes also.
Yes, and if you have, so for example, when I had my funeral home, our best option natural burial ground was out in Joshua Tree. And that soil it's beautiful out there. There's, you get to be buried literally next to a Joshua Tree, how lovely. And, there's a spiritual essence to the desert, which can be quite lovely. But it takes longer for your body to decompose in that kind of sandy soil versus, you get a really rich farming Midwest soil. You put the body in there, we're talking about a couple months to completely decompose.
Bones and all.
Yeah, in some places, absolutely. And that soil is just really artfully designed, especially since most green burials are not dug that deep down because the richest soil is really near the surface.
Now
so you want to.
I can see a problem though, because you get buried there, then it becomes farmland. There's they're plowing, clank, they hit something. Oh, it's your knee replacement. It was sitting there in the ground and it fucked up some poor guy's John Deere tractor. He's going to have to pay for the nose to repairs, right? Isn't this a problem?
This is a great point, and a segue to talk about something called conservation burial.
Ooh.
And what conservation burial is the idea that because we value so much in the United States our forever grave, which by the way is an extremely unique to the United States prospect.
The idea of having one grave that's going to be there.
One grave forever and ever, perpetual care, this is it. With conservation burial, the idea is because those laws are in place, if you can bury plants bodies in a green burial way, just with the corpse in the ground, in a piece of land, through conservation easement, you're essentially preventing that land from being developed. You're not having the situation of the farmer come and plant over you, or they build a target on you, because we've planted some corpses there, and that land is done. You know, and you know, of course, you hear these terrible stories about you know, building a target or something and finding a black burial ground or an indigenous burial ground or those things, but those come from old laws, old ideas. Like nowadays, you can't just plow over a cemetery. And especially if we know who everybody is and it's registered. So having conservation burial is actually a really good way to protect land. But something that, and I'll talk about the second option here, which is the idea of composting the dead. Something that has been a little frustrating for me, I admit, as I'm working towards legalizing composting of the dead body, is that you have green burial people say, well, we just have green burial, you don't need that. And it's a little frustrating for me because, especially having lived in a really big city, the number of advocates who I agree with 99.9%, but live in a much more rural area and talk about this absolutely magical world where I just took Dad's body on the back of my old Ford truck or in a horse-drawn carriage, and we drove through the center of town, and I hopped out at the death certificate registration office and I signed a piece of paper and I took him to the magical green burial ground where the plot was $1,500 and I put him in the ground. That's absolutely gorgeous. I'm growing with jealousy. Like absolutely filled with jealousy. None of that. Absolutely none of that.
Yeah.
So the idea of composting the dead originated from an idea that I've been writing about and following from the beginning called the Urban Death Project, now known as Recompose, which was started by a woman named Katrina Spade. And the idea being that if you live in an urban area and you still want the idea of becoming a tree, you still want what's created by a green burial, you still want to become soil, can you mimic that in a way that's actually closer to cremation? So can you have these big vessels where you put, you know, the ideas of browns and greens of composting? You have the browns, which are wood chips and alfalfa, and with just putting the dead human body in it, over a period of about 6 to 8 weeks, it transforms into soil. And your body completely, over the course of this time, will decompose entirely into the soil. Your bones as well will, over time, become soil. And what you have is basically a truck bed of soil to work with. And that soil can either go to, you know, your own trees at home, or often what people do is they donate it to a conservation land. So, for example, in Washington, where this is legal, there's a place that I was able to visit called Bell's Mountain Conservation, where they're doing, you know, was completely blighted by logging, and they're trying to reintroduce these native species of trees, and that composted soil is what is being used for that. So you're actually quite going to a really lovely thing. So green burial is almost like I want to become a tree, whereas compost native species of tree in Washington, where this is legal, there's a place that I was able to visit called Bell's Mountain Conservation, where they're doing, you know, was completely blighted by logging, and they're trying to reintroduce these native species of trees, and that composted soil is what is being used for that. So you're actually quite going to a really lovely thing. So green burial is almost like I want to become a tree, whereas composting, you could be like, I want to become a forest. You know, use my soil wherever is helpful. And for me, there's a real a return to a humility there that, of course, is wildly different than the idea of this is my special burial ground. Put my body in this special box. Put it in this special vault. I'm going to be there like a pharaoh forever. And then the third option would be even more of a direct replacement for cremation, which is something called aquamation or water cremation. And the idea there is to use very high heat water and potassium hydroxide to essentially flash decompose the body down to bones. So the end product is very similar to cremated remains. You can still scatter them, but you're not using natural gas, you're not having emissions, and so it's just, you're using water, of course, but it's overall a better, an environmentally more sound cremation.
Yeah. So the composting burial it's similar to green burial in some way, but it's happening. Basically, it sounds like when one of my friends has like a composter in her backyard that she turns her food scraps into dirt. It's like basically that, where it's happening in a container.
It's essentially that. I mean, they're happening at licensed facilities.
No, not
they're happening at licensed, regulated facilities. Not in anyone's backyard. Although, listen, some of us real self-reliant folks would not be against that, but that's not in fact the law. So yeah, they happen in the ones that Recompose, and there are now several companies that are doing this as it becomes increasingly legal. They look kind of like Japanese capsule hotels, you know, with big white circles in front, and they're all vessels that this is happening. Each one has a human body in it that is becoming soil.
I love the end of that because I think people enjoy the scattered ashes ritual or request. That's why it's in so many movies and TV shows, you know, as people really like that as a gesture. How much better is that to have something nourishing? It's not ashes, it's soil. Like, you could say, hey, please, I'd like this kind of burial, and then please, plant me somewhere, or plant me at this place that's important to me, or just take a little bit of soil and sprinkle it in the garden, or whatever it is. That's like, the imagery of that is really beautiful.
Exactly, and it's actually, versus cremation, people often say, I want my cremated remains to grow a tree. And that's a lovely thought, but it's inorganic material, because the high heat of the cremation renders it inorganic.
So I want to become climate change. That's what you're...
Yeah. Well, and if my cremated remains...
to me, or just take a little bit of soil and sprinkle it in the garden, or whatever it is. That's like, the imagery of that is really beautiful.
Exactly, and it's actually, versus cremation, people often say, I want my cremated remains to grow a tree. And that's a lovely thought, but it's inorganic material, because the high heat of the cremation renders it inorganic.
So I want to become climate change. That's what you're...
Yeah. Well, and it's, here's the deal, it's like, composting is not fixing climate change, nor is cremation causing climate change. We're talking about a somewhat lower level of responsibility here, but I do think, metaphorically, there's so much, if you are willing to not have your very special legacy, embalmed body, under the ground, special piece of land forever, if you are willing to see yourself as somebody that gives your body to a larger project of the organic life cycle after death, that's a really important existential way that we should probably be looking at our roles in the world.
And that's something that a lot of people want. I want to be returned to the earth. I want to... people love the idea of, like, I'm eating dinosaurs right now. Just like that sort of vision of a cycle. And people love the idea of being returned to that cycle. And these are all ways that accomplish that too.
Exactly. But the issue right now is that each of these, both water cremation, so green burial is legal anywhere. And if you go to a cemetery and they don't have green burial as an option, they say, no, you gotta have the vault, you gotta have the casket, that's their policy. That's their own individual policy. A lot of them do it because they don't, the big concrete vaults under the ground make it so much easier for them to landscape, for them to run the big backhoes and mowers over without the graves sinking.
That's why they don't have the graves. It's for the lawn mowers.
Exactly.
Oh, God damn
exactly.
It. Come on.
Yep.
You want me to have a standing up grave just to make it easier for you to, like, you don't have to pay the lawn mowing guy as much? You can, that fucking sucks. Now I'm mad. Now
I finally got you. I threw out all of these, like, long-standing funeral issues, and you're like, this is the one that I cannot abide. So if a cemetery that where you live doesn't have green burial, it's entirely their policy. They have not been willing to set aside a section to have this type of burial. Whereas like aquamation, the water cremation, or composting has to be legalized state by state by state, which is a long and arduous process, which I seem to have somehow gotten myself very involved in. And but I will say is that especially with composting, which started later than aquamation in the legalization process, so where I believe it changes, but it's roughly 25 to 30 states for aquamation and 6 states now for composting. The composting is going pretty quick. It's really, like, we were expecting, because it's hard to change funeral laws. They're very entrenched. People don't want, it's not like sexy legislation.
Yeah, no, you go meet with the politicians and they're like, you want to do what now? What?
Yeah, what now?
You have to explain so much to them.
You do, but I do think there's a real public mandate for it. People, at this point, the desire for it is so much more than even the sheer number of people who have been composting, because we've really only been composting the dead for 2-3 years now.
Okay.
And there was experiments going on to prove the process before that, but sheer number of people do not equal the number of people who really want it. Once it's sort of like once they've been awakened to the possibility, people our age, we don't particularly want it right now because we're alive, which is a good reason to not want it. We don't want it for ourselves, but we want it for ourselves 40 years from now. When we die, we got to make sure it's legal. So let's get her done. So there's been a real, outpouring of public mandate of people who want this, and that has really helped the process move through. Because once you find the right politicians who are like, hey, even I want this for myself. This is personal for me. And then you have, anytime it stalls in the committee, you have 400 people sending letters saying, hey, so I want this.
Yeah.
Please vote this through. It's been more successful than we could have anticipated.
It's really incredible. Well, we'll take another really quick break. We'll be right back with more Caitlin Doty. Since I slowed the roll on drinking, one thing that I haven't missed: boost your mood and enhance creativity and relaxation. Treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul is offering my offer that my little dog isn't bored. That are meant to engage, and the nom.com/password copyright McDonald's. Just in your mind. You and as someone who we've been talking about death all day so far, it was a little bit uncomfortable, but I do find that I find it strange how little I think about my death in my everyday life. And as someone who deals with it every single day of your life. I'm wondering, what do you feel the benefits are of keeping your own death foremost in your mind? I mean, do you walk around every day going like, I'm gonna die, and how does that change your life?
I don't live in a perpetual state of I'm gonna die. Although I would argue that that's like kind of running through everyone's mental landscape at a very subconscious level, whether they know it or not. But all the work I do to get people to die better and have better options for their dead bodies doesn't necessarily put me into a constant state of like, I'm gonna die. I can live most days without that. But I would say that death gives me such an incredible sense of purpose. And even when I'm burnt out, and Lord knows there have been times that I have been burnt out, just like the rest of us, I really always come back to doing this work around death and doing this work around death acceptance and helping people understand death, because it's just so meaningful. And what we can do and what we still have to do around death, and the idea that we're in this place right now where we're legalizing 2 new ways of taking care of the dead body that we've never really done before.
Yeah.
Not like this. And that people are coming together to want it and to engage it. It's just such a rich time to be involved in this work, and such an exciting time to be involved in this work, and not like this. And that people are coming